and welcome to Restoring the Soul, a podcast dedicated to helping you close the gap between what you believe and what you actually experience. I'm your producer, Brian Beatty. Thank you for listening. Now, at the time of the recording of today's conversation, it was 28 years in the making. So why 28? Well, Michael's guest is his wife of 28 years, Julianne Cusick. Today we'll discover why it took Julianne 25 of those years to fulfill a dream. And she'll also answer the important question, how do you recover from your husband's sexual brokenness, addiction, and infidelity? Michael and Julianne have been on quite a journey together, one that includes seasons of love, betrayal, reconciliation, and hope. Today's conversation will also put the spotlight on Julianne's journey, and I hope you're inspired and encouraged as she shares her perspective on keeping her dreams of becoming a marriage and family therapist alive in the midst of distractions and unexpected life trauma. We're thrilled to share this conversation with you, especially as we conclude Holy Week and celebrate Easter on Sunday together. Michael and Julianne's testimony should be an inspiration to us all that the same power that resurrected Jesus from the dead is the same power that can restore a marriage and bring a dead heart back to life. So without any further delay, here's your host, Michael John Cusick.
Welcome to the program, everybody. It's another episode of Restoring the Soul, and I am Michael John Cusick, and today it's a special treat where I am in the studio with my bride of almost 28 years, Julianne Cusick. Welcome.
Thanks, Michael. I'm glad to be here.
Long time coming. We've been trying to make this happen for almost 3 years. Talk to us about why it's taken so long.
Well, I have been in graduate school for the last 3 years pursuing a master's in marriage and family therapy.
Bum, 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 bum. And you recently...
I recently graduated and finished my counseling internship. So the last year I was in school and in a counseling internship. So whenever you asked me, my answer would be when I'm done with graduate school and my internship.
And you have been faithful, as you always are. It's taken 3 years, but here you are. I want you to talk in a minute about why you went marriage and family and why you went to graduate school, because you've actually been working in Colorado as a registered therapist for many years, and this was to take things to another level. So why graduate school and why marriage and family?
It started out under grim circumstances. This is certainly not the path or direction I would have chosen the way it came about. But early on in our marriage, I think the first year it was that we were married, you got your master's in counseling. And a couple of years later, I was scheduled to go to school for my master's. But that did not happen because I had the unexpected master's.
Journey.
Yes, the unexpected journey.
So let me hit pause. You were accepted into the Master of Arts in Counseling under what would have been the instruction of Dr. Dan Allender, Dr. Larry Crabb, Dr. Tom Varney, that whole group. You audited that program for a couple of different years and you had been deeply immersed in the material.
Oh, yes, that's true.
And then you got accepted to the program and everything fell apart.
Yes. So the first year of our marriage, while you were going through the program, I think I audited that year a number of classes. I was in a wives group for wives who had husbands going through the master's degree. I think a year later, at some point, you were an intern. And so I did a lot of auditing of classes out there while you were an intern. So so I had pretty much sat in on everything, but the group practicums I wasn't allowed, in those were for students only, but all of the other classes, yes, I had sat in on. You
just didn't have to write the papers and do all that.
Well, seeing as I am a 1 on the Enneagram, there were some papers I actually did. Call me a glutton for punishment. And then I actually took human growth and development for credit back 25, I guess, years ago now. Yes. So then about 3 years after we got married, I was accepted and enrolled to start in the master's program in counseling, and had quit my job so I could be free to go to school. And the closer it got, the more I just felt this heaviness, like it just didn't feel, felt like a heavy burden. It didn't feel like a lightness. And I remember the passage, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I thought, this does not feel easy or light at all. And not knowing what was ahead, but definitely feeling like this wasn't the time I was supposed to be doing this, I withdrew before school started. And then several weeks after that was when I caught you in a lie that unraveled probably a 1 to 2 year history of secrets and hiddenness and betrayal and some sexual acting out that I knew nothing about. So the world as I knew it at that point came crashing down.
And so I want you to talk about this. Obviously, there was the shattered dream of a marriage, of what you thought was, and what you suddenly discovered back in 1994 of my infidelity, sexual addiction, deceit, lies. But on top of that, there was this other shattered dream of you lost this dream of graduate school. And,
yes.
And I'm bringing this up because it's so important. It's related to the trauma work that you do with betrayed wives, that it's oftentimes just multiple traumas and losses and wounds all together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talk about what that was like for you, as together here we are sitting 25 years later.
Oh, it was a holy and horrible journey. I would never want to go through it again. But hindsight is 20/20, and it was definitely necessary, I think, for healing for both of us and for our marriage, for us to have gone through that. Again, not that either one of us would want to go through that again or would choose that. But despite the grim circumstances, you can see God's hand in it all now. I certainly didn't then. If any of our listeners have listened to some of my pre-recorded talks from the last time I spoke, probably about 15 years ago, maybe a little longer now, that was my unexpected journey, right? But there was a lot of grief and a lot of trauma, a lot of betrayal. I was very angry. I was really angry at God. Here I am 3 years in, married to this Christian man who's getting a Christian counseling degree. And, you're doing what? And you're lying to me and you've betrayed me. And I was just devastated. So didn't know if I would come through that. But that wasn't the end of the story.
That wasn't the end of the story. And will you comment about what it was like to have that wound on top of a wound, the dream of graduate school on top of this other betrayal, like a double loss, a double wound? How did that impact your journey? Because you actually made the choice not to participate in graduate school for your own well-being, and yet it was still this huge loss. Well,
it made sense to me why it wasn't time to go to graduate school. I didn't understand. I had been waiting. I'd wanted to go through the program, for 4 years. And so I didn't understand why, when it was, quote unquote, finally my turn, why that didn't happen. But as soon as all of the betrayal came out, all of the secrets, I was so relieved not to be in school, not to have academic work. And mostly I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I would feel so ashamed if everyone, in the program knew. I am so glad that I can go through this in kind of silence and secrecy myself, right? Silence and solitude. And I did. I walked alone for many, many, many months. I had one person that I met with who knew. And then, of course, we met with a mentor initially. So I was mad and angry and disappointed that my master's degree wasn't going to give me a certificate at the end, but that this master's degree I was going through was, how do you recover from your husband's sexual brokenness and sexual addiction and sexual infidelity? Like, that's the degree nobody signs up for.
And back then, there were not the books. There were not the resources. Nobody was talking about this. It was kind of your husband will hopefully get some help, but forgive and forget. And let me ask you about this. You said that there was this shame there, that you would feel this shame. And to many, this might sound counterintuitive, but it's a big issue for women who have had a sexual betrayal or betrayal of any kind. It was me that sinned grievously against you. It was me who deceived you and betrayed you. And of course, I felt a lot of shame after that was out. And of course, I had a lot of core shame that I was unaware of that had to be healed. But why did you feel shame? And is this a common experience for women?
Great question. Yes, it is a common experience for women to experience. And for me, I was ashamed of what you had done and read into that as, what does that say about me? And I think that's where, as women, as wives who've been betrayed, we can kind of stumble is, I don't want people to know that, this is what my husband has done, because what will that say about me? What will that say about our marriage? What will that say about our ministry? So it casts a shadow on everything. It's not just something that is dark and secretive and there's shame on the man. That shadow encompasses the wife, the family, the children. And at that point, we didn't have children, thankfully. But I did. I had a lot of shame that this was your issue, and vicarious shame of, what did that say about me then if I have a husband who struggles with this?
So along with that question of what does this say about me, what are the other questions that you were asking or that other women are asking? And I'm assuming that question of what does this say about me, there's a negative answer to that, like, what's wrong with me? Am I not enough?
Yeah, it's kind of like, why am I not good enough? Why am I in a marriage to this Christian man, and after 3 years, I find out this has been going on behind my back for 2 years, and it just changes everything. It rewrites history. And that, we were young, we were still newlyweds. Present day, I work with women who've been married, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and they're finding out about this secret double life that their husbands have had. So talk about rewriting history, and talk about casting a shadow backwards over everything. It's infinitely greater than what I went through.
Hey, let me ask you a question. As we are sitting here in this studio, in our office that I come to every day, and you're here multiple times a week, and I'm used to sitting in front of this microphone, I'm aware that I am taking more sips of water than I normally do because my mouth is dry, and that as I'm checking in with myself, my heart is beating a little faster. There's a little bit of tightness. I'm tapping my feet more than I normally do. And we have done, maybe an overstatement, endless processing and much counseling over years and years and years around this wound and betrayal of mine to you in 1994, 25 years ago. But here I am. I teach on trauma. I teach on sexual addiction, and I'm nervous.
You're aware of the activation. Your central nervous system is being activated.
Because I can go somewhere and teach about this, and I'm the expert, but I'm just aware that sitting with you, it's a whole different deal.
Yeah.
So I know that you like vulnerability and self-disclosure. That's not only why I'm doing it, but I'm like,
I think it's important for our listeners, right? Because if it's happening to us and we're the, quote unquote experts on this and help others get free, I think it's important for them to know that 25 years later, as you and I sit together to talk about it, that still causes an activation in your body.
Yeah. And that's something that I try to do personally and something I try to help others learn is just checking in with myself. And at first I thought, well, it's late in the afternoon on a Friday, or maybe I didn't have enough to eat and my blood sugar's low, but I'm nervous.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Here's an observation. I do a lot of this talking with the women I work with and the wives support groups that I lead, and really any chance I get to talk about sex addiction recovery, or more importantly, betrayal trauma recovery for the wife, the partner. But it's not, and then you speak and teach on this all the time, but it's not often that we come together, and certainly in this intimate studio setting, right, to talk about what happened 25 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know that we've ever done it on microphones together.
Huh. Wow. Well, here's a first time live happening.
Right.
Yeah. And it's been a while. Yeah. So I kind of like to talk about, do you have any other questions? Cause I'm eager to talk about like how it was that I got to graduate school and how I got to be in the studio with you today, but I don't want to.
Well, no, it's all about me. So let's focus on my activation and my heart rate.
So what do you need right now?
No, I'm kidding.
To feel good. No, seriously, what do you need right now for me to?
I am just paying attention to it. And I thought it would be a good illustration because on this podcast, I like to do kind of real time, real life stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm ready to move on. Just sometimes to put words to it is good, but thank you for asking.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you did that. I think it's really cool. And it brought awareness to me that, yeah, this is the first time we've done this together. I'm trying to check into myself and see if I've got any kind of activation going on, but I'm just pretty excited to be here today.
Cool.
I think
As am I, which exists right alongside,
right?
Fight or flight.
Yeah.
So
well, and here, let me just reflect on what I just said, that I'm not activated. I want to point out that 25 years ago, I didn't think there would ever be a time in my life that I would talk about this and not be activated.
And let's define activated for a moment. You mean that your nervous system is dysregulated?
Oh, yeah. Like that my heart would race and my palms would get sweaty and my stomach, that I'd feel sick. Because for months after the disclosure, every morning, I wake up and talk about how I would just have this wave of nausea come over me. So I lived in this triggered or activated state, this post-trauma state with symptoms of I can't eat, I can't sleep, I have sweaty palms, I'm nervous all the time, my stomach feels like there's a flying saucer in there.
Hair trigger, irritability, anger, anxiety, sadness.
Yes.
Any given moment. Yeah.
Yes. All of the above. All of that, go from angry to tears. It would just change. And like ick, this state of ick that I lived in. And I never would have thought that I would ever heal or recover from that. So to be able to talk about it and I'm not angry at you and, I don't want to minimize certainly what either of us went through or what listeners are going through. But just to validate, it is really hard for partners. And I never thought I'd be in the place I am now.
Well, there might be people listening right now who are going through this kind of recovery from addiction, infidelity, and betrayal, thinking, I can't even dream about the possibility of potentially maybe one day not being so overwhelmed and flooded with these emotions.
Absolutely.
But it does happen, and you're living proof of that.
Yeah.
So let's reroute for a minute, because I want you to be able to tell a little more of your professional journey. And also let folks know that we will be doing, on the tails of this podcast, a series of 4 to 6 episodes of you sharing and teaching about betrayal trauma. But I think we need to do an episode on just this whole idea of regulation and kind of helping ourselves to get grounded and live within the window of tolerance.
Yeah. And thankfully, there's a lot more resources out there now than there were 25 years ago when I went through this. I remember getting a couple of books and I couldn't really hold focus to read, but some of them were just crap. And I remember just whipping them across the room. Like, That's not helpful. I'm not reading that. And so thankfully for our listeners, there's a lot more than just Restoring the Soul that's out there. And literally, I think every day in the last, 3-4 days, it seems like I've heard of a new podcast or a new website or a new book that was written. And so there's more and more out there about this whole trauma model. But when I was going through this, when we were going through this, everything was pretty much 12-step codependent. I'm an enabler of your behavior. And that never sat with me because I thought, how can I enable something I don't even know that's going on? And that's a real soapbox, but I don't think you want me to go there just yet.
So, Jules, as you describe the trauma and the difficulty of the nausea and all of the dysregulation and activation and really walking through a deep valley. Fast forward for our listeners, how you got into doing this work that you're doing now as a professional therapist.
I love that question, Michael, and I'm eager to answer it. However, as you were asking the question, another part that I think could be helpful for listeners is the other part of the activation that happened for me. One was the betrayal trauma between us, right? You had lied to me, so I had been lied to. What I believed was true about you was now no longer true. There was more information coming to the surface, right? And I was having to process all of that. Well, the other part of the trauma reaction was previous trauma in my life where I had been betrayed, where I had been lied to. And so it was a double whammy. And I think that's essential for women to know as they're going through this, that our other trauma, if we have it, emotional, physical, sexual, whatever it may be, when we find out in an intimate partner relationship that trust has been broken, we're not only wounded there, but trauma loves to piggyback onto past and previous trauma, and that can get activated as well. And I think, say my anger, for example, was really off the charts, and maybe 50% of it was related to you, but the other 50% was related to these past abuses and traumas, these past indiscretions of other people where I had been lied to or hurt or betrayed.
So it's fair to say that when, and this was the case for you, when a woman experiences betrayal from infidelity or sex addiction, whatever that might be, that's going to kind of light the fuse of any old wounding that's there. It's going to bring that to the surface as well.
Yes, it certainly can. And that has certainly been my personal experience and my experience as I have worked with a number of wives over the past 15 or 20 years.
So how do you even begin to untangle that?
Oh my gosh.
The past from the present.
Yeah. That's a process. And I think it really takes the right person. And I say the right person because I don't want to say a skilled therapist or a trusted friend or a pastor, because what it really needs to be is somebody who can understand and hold space and understand trauma, and then also safety. I found that even before I had clinical training, I was able to create and hold safety, a safe space for other women. And that is the most important thing I could say, I think, for a woman looking for help would be, do you feel safe with this person? Do you feel that they have your best interests at heart? It's very hard. It's impossible to do trauma work when a person doesn't feel safe with the person that's helping them.
What would be some examples of how specifically someone might feel unsafe? Because oftentimes we think about, physical harm and things like that.
Oh, no, I'm talking about emotional safety. Granted, obviously you want to be physically safe, let's assume that. But if somebody is putting themselves above you as the expert or the professional, and you don't feel like they're human, if somebody is hiding behind or using scripture to confront you on, that would be an unsafe situation. Or if somebody's talking about, how you were complicit in this, your codependency, your co-addiction. There's not a place for that in the initial setting of disclosure and the emotional betrayal trauma.
So I'm thinking about the folks that I work with, and we kind of work at two different ends of the hallway here at Restoring the Soul. But I work with women with trauma.
Yes.
Sometimes that's betrayal trauma, but also just women with complex traumatic issues.
Yes.
And I work with couples and I work with men, but sometimes that safety is a sense of I can't just, if they're feeling unsafe, I can't just be who I am at this moment, messy, nervous, anxious, crying, angry. Right. I have to somehow fall into a script or to submit to expectations. And so a therapist that has rigid expectations or here's how you ought to be, that's something to watch out for.
Oh, I would say a therapist, a pastor, a friend, anyone who has expectations that you need to get over this quickly or jump through certain hoops to recover. So my process was long and messy, and I think part of that was previous unresolved trauma in my own life, and a lot of that was a lack of support. I really went through this with a lot of my own shame that we were walking through this, a lot of isolation. We had only been out here in Colorado 3 years and only been married 3 years. We didn't really have a good support community. And yet it was that very summer when everything fell apart that we started attending a really alive church. And eventually we both had a lot of healing from that community and from some of the resources there, and then became a part of that healing community where we were praying with other people. We were leading groups. We were speaking at conferences and whatnot. That was a real gift. And going to conferences, that's where a lot of my pastoral care counseling training, came, was after we become a part of that church.
And for me, that was also part of my healing, but it was also part of my training.
Yes.
Because I had been a therapist, I was licensed, but that's where I began to learn about what John Eldredge would go on to call the 4 streams, this idea that in addition to just talk therapy, that there can be inner healing.
Yes.
That there can be warfare where we come against the accusations and the lies, where there's a way to integrate our healing into how we walk with God. And ultimately that the Holy Spirit is a counselor, and that can sound superficial and woo-woo, but that we can really learn to have conversational intimacy and to hear the voice of God and to be present. And all of that was offered and available at our church in a really miraculous way.
Well, and that even takes me back to really when I first became a believer. I think 2 of the first things, that I did as a brand new Christian is, one, I got into counseling with a good Christian counselor, and this person happened to have been trained by Drs. Larry Crabb and Dan Allender. And then I got connected with a mentor who had also graduated from that program, but was not functioning as a counselor at that time. She was a mentor. And the first Christian book, if you will, that I ever read was Inside Out. So I had been mentored in a small group doing Inside Out for about 2 years before you and I even met. And that having that foundation was essential. So I came to Jesus with, salvation in one hand and a bag of my baggage, right? In the other hand, or maybe 2 hands full of baggage. Here I am, Lord, let's go through this. So I don't have my Christianity is separate from my healing experience, my counseling experience. They both came to me together. So, Peter Scazzaro and Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, right? That was my experience from the get-go.
So right from the giddy up in your faith journey, it was emotional health and spiritual health were connected, and there never really was a separation of those two.
Yes, for me. And I'm so thankful. I think the Lord knew that I needed both because I was a mess. And I'm really grateful that they have been so integrated. And so then in the aftermath of our broken marriage, a lot of personal healing as well as training were interspersed together. So, Leanne Payne Ministries, Pastoral Care, Francis McNutt. There were a lot of different things that we were exposed to, things as in training and theories and theophostics and whatnot that were personally beneficial, but also were equipping us at the same time. And then I think it was about that time that as I had worked through some of my past and present trauma, that women started wanting to talk to me about their own experiences.
I can't believe you circled back around, because I was aware that we were like all over the map and great conversation. So if you weren't here, I would have just like kept going on good tangents and fun tangents, but I can't believe you circled back around. So keep going with that. Women started wanting to meet with you, and what started happening inside of you?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because, for 5 years, I was really committed to not telling anyone my story. And it was through telling my story to a few people. Well, let me say this. It's really hard to keep your husband's sex addiction private when he's leading a public ministry. So I think that had a big part that I could try and stick my head in the sand and say, no, thanks. I really don't want to have anything to do with this. And like, this is why it's the master's degree nobody signs up for. People started coming to me, would you meet with me for coffee? Can you meet with me one-on-one? Hey, I just found out, my husband is, looking at porn or visiting prostitutes or whatever, the assortment of things. And because I love people and I love women, this compassion of what I had been through started to come out for others. And I came to a place where I said, I don't want another woman to suffer in silence and shame the way I do. There's no reason for a woman to go through this alone. And so that's when I started meeting with people, really did a lot of pastoral care. And then about 15 or 16 years ago, started offering a wives support group. And currently that is not online. It's just something I do out here in Colorado. I've had women drive from as far as 2.5 hours away, one way, to come to the group, which is very honoring and humbling for me. But I think it shows how desperate women are to get good help and to be heard and seen and validated for the pain and suffering that they're going through.
Yeah, in our region here in the Front Range of Colorado, Denver, and North and South, there are a handful, just a small handful of 12-step groups for women in recovery from betrayal. But there's no groups or very, very few that I know of that are doing any kind of more relational, inner healing and heart-oriented work. And I always want to qualify that when I refer to 12 steps and then to our approach, whether it's the Surfing for God restorative approach or what you do with women in your group called Unexpected Journey, that it's not better or worse or good or bad. It's just different. And people need different kinds of help at different times.
Absolutely. However, I will say there has been some well-intentioned folks using 12-step codependent model, and it has been damaging.
How so?
Well, here's some of the stories that I've heard. I've sat across women who've come in and said, well, I went for counseling and I went for couples counseling with my husband and he's betrayed me. And the therapist said, well, that's in the past and we're not going to address, that lack of trust or the infidelity. We're just going to focus on your marriage. To me, that's a travesty.
Now, would that be a 12-step recovery model, or would that be the kind of that individual's approach?
Well, good point. I'm just thinking of some of the
more prescriptive models of how you move forward.
Just bad therapy. So specifically 12-step would be a woman sitting across from a therapist and being told she's codependent, that she has a disease of codependency, and that she needs treatment. And that's the key word. That's kind of a buzzword. If you're a partner and somebody is telling you that you need treatment, my little spidey senses go off when I hear that. Spouses of a betrayed partner, and this could be a man or a woman. So I also want to give a little commercial that there's a lot of men out there who they're faithful, but their wives are the ones who have been going out. And usually it can be porn, but many times it's relationships, and that's pretty devastating as well. So if you're the betrayed partner and somebody is saying you need treatment, I get a little antsy when I hear that, because my experience personally and professionally is that the betrayed partner needs support. Now, they need support that's trauma-informed, that understands sexual addiction, sexual compulsivity, but they need support. To me, treatment indicates that there's something wrong with you that you need to have treated. If we have cancer, we go for cancer treatment. If we have a sex addiction, we go for recovery treatment. And so I think just a sensitivity, a lot of the language out there is offering treatment for partners. And so that's a concern. But pastors, well-meaning pastors can do it if they're not aware. And I think there's a lot of well-meaning pastors and counselors who want to help, and yet their lens or their framework is very, very narrow. And so please, if you're listening and you're a caregiver and you're not familiar with trauma recovery and sexual betrayal, please refer that person to somebody who is. But I've had women say, well, the pastor said to me, are you satisfying your husband sexually? And this has nothing to do with, the woman, her sexuality, what she does in bed, what she doesn't do in bed, her body, her breast size, her hip size. It's so not about that. And to imply that or put that on a woman is damaging.
And you've seen again and again that women come in with these kinds of stories. We're not just trying to be hypercritical, nor are you trying to, be bombastic and telling the worst stories, but that there's some themes of how people come in and they have been not just, in some cases, not cared for at all, but that the care that's been offered has been hurtful.
Yes. And those are not even some of the worst stories. But they're heartbreaking. And so it's trauma on top of trauma. It's betrayal on top of betrayal. It's saying to a rape victim, instead of saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Let's get you some care and some help. It's saying, well, what were you wearing? And kind of blaming the victim.
Which is hard to feel safe and like you can be just who you are and feel your pain and anxiety.
Exactly. Which is why the number one thing you want to go for is somebody that you feel safe with.
So we're bouncing around here, but I want to make sure that people can kind of hear about, you went from caring for women, meeting with them for coffee and things like that, getting involved in ministry at church, to people with a wide variety of sexual brokenness. But at one point, you became a registered psychotherapist in Colorado and then went through this journey with grad school. Talk about that.
Well, as I was working with women, I think I've led about 15 years of groups with women and kind of paid attention to the women that were there and their symptoms and seeing this trauma. I started trying to research and find books, and there was very, very little research and information out there, but I kept on my quest. And then about 5 years ago, I came across Dr. Omar Menwala out in California at the Institute for Sexual Health. At this point, our marriage had been recovered. You'd been meeting with men. I'd been meeting with women. We'd both been leading groups. And in the meantime, we'd had a child together and adopted our daughter. And so I was busy being a mom, right, for many years and just kind of helping women part-time. But as the kids got older, and I just am really passionate about this trauma recovery model. It just makes so much sense. And it hurts me to see hurting people get hurt more. So long story short, I went out to California. I asked Dr. Manwala, if I could come, and I said, hey, I'm a registered psychotherapist. I've been, mostly functioning as a pastoral counselor for many years. I'm working with this, women who have been betrayed sexually by their husbands. Can I come out to this training that you're doing for professionals? And he graciously said yes. And it was real interesting. So there was my co-leader and I, who I have led groups with. There were a few women who were professionals in the trauma field, like working with sexual assault, rape victims. So they knew the trauma. There were several who had training in the sex addiction model. There's all sorts of different names and lingos and letters, but they were trained more in 12-step. And then there were several PhDs, and everything that Dr. Manwala was teaching was resonating with everything that I believed and that I had seen from the women I had worked with and individually and in groups, and what I believed in and what I was doing. So it's a real affirmation for me.
In other words, that you actually started to develop this lens and see trauma beneath the surface, and that trauma was the issue as opposed to codependency or a co-addict model.
Yes.
There was just not much or nothing written, no research done, and your practice and what you're doing where women were being helped bumped up against with this clinician and researcher, Omar Manwala, and the validation was, hey, this is a real thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was great. It was validation. I'm onto this. Like I'm reading this accurately. So personally, I was validated, but then professionally, it was like, hey, here's this man who's a PhD, who's a researcher who teaches, therapists, and he's saying the same thing I'm saying, and we are in alignment. So, I talked with him and I said, how did you discover this? And he goes, the same way you did. I was paying attention to my clients, and oh my gosh, it was so amazing. And he's such a kind man, and that was really the impetus for okay, what do I need to do this work well and have the credentials or the licensing or whatever it is that I need to be able to have a voice, because I wanted to have impact a larger audience just than the people that could come to me here in Colorado. And I don't know what that's going to look like yet. Right. So here we are. So they said, get licensed. So, I literally came home from this conference, looked at all the different mental health licenses. For those of you who are interested, there's, licensed professional counselor, clinical or licensed social worker, or licensed clinical social worker. And then there's a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I thought, well, marriage and family, right? Because that's what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with marriages. And so I studied what's the core curriculum, right, between LPC and LMFT. And I really connected with this idea of groups and families and how they function, and that they're a system, and what one person does impacts the other, and getting underneath kind of what's going on in the system. So that was the degree that I pursued. So I've spent 3 years in graduate school.
And you kicked butt.
I really did. I loved it. It was great for me.
I want to just shout out to you. Not only did you work hard and persevere, but I kind of skimmed through both of my degrees because I can read fast and do well on tests, but you really went deep. You read everything, and you would read the extra books. And I learned a lot from you while you were in your graduate degree. You've gotten a lot fresher training. You had different approaches and instructors, and I just really think your training was exceptional that a lot of people don't get.
Yeah, I'm really pleased. So if you're a faculty member in Denver, you know who you are if you happen to ever listen to this. Great team of people I worked with. And what was really special for me is that anytime we had research projects, which was every class because we were in graduate school, I always did my paper on sex addiction-induced trauma or betrayal trauma. And there's more and more research out there in the clinical journals. And I really dug deep into that material. And so I'm that much more confident in what I do and in understanding what the nature of the beast is, if you will, of what happens. It's a different kind of betrayal. You know, if couples married and one person has, a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction, that's pretty relevant and impactful. And there's a whole bunch of dynamics that play out in the system. But when something is sexual in nature, it's a different type of betrayal. It's something very personal that really goes to the heart of a woman. And so getting insight into that, exploring that. The other thing is that this porn addiction epidemic that our country and our world is dealing with has just grown exponentially. A couple of weeks ago, my daughter and I stopped by an estate sale, and I chuckled. There were still in the plastic covers Playboy magazines from the 1970s or something. And I thought, to go back to the day when it was in print and you had to, and it was sealed and you had to go to the corner 7-Eleven or whatever, and it was kept behind the counter down low. We've crossed the line when we're longing for the old days of just Playboys. Because children have access in their cellular devices. It's online pornography is just rampant, and young children are getting exposed at early ages. Teenagers are getting confused about what healthy sexuality is because they're learning about sex through porn, and it's very twisted. They're struggling with shame and guilt and confusion. And then men in their 20s are struggling with erectile dysfunction because they can't get aroused and sustain arousal with a real woman because of so much pornography use and masturbation. And then you look at women or couples who've been married 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and this hidden secret, because there's so much shame around it, comes out, and there's this devastation to the woman, to the marriage, to the children. And that just is like a drop in a still lake. The ripples go out and out and out. People come to us. They've lost their home. They've lost jobs. They've lost churches. They've lost communities. They can't go to the store without seeing somebody who knows their story because it was made public. And there's no safe place for them.
So you have graduated recently as a marriage and family therapist. You're working toward licensure as a licensed marriage and family therapist, but for many years you've been a registered psychotherapist and practicing here in Colorado. As we begin to wrap up, now that you're graduated, what's the kind of work that you want to do? Because here at Restoring the Soul, we're known for intensive counseling, but you also do individual counseling with people locally. But kind of talk about, as you look forward, what are you hoping to bring?
Hopes and dreams. Well, I'll confess I've had a little reluctance to dive into intensive counseling. And it reminds me of when I didn't want to talk to other people about this 25 years ago, and God kind of drew me. I say he drew me with cords of human kindness, because I just melt when I meet a person and hear their story. Because I want to be available, right? Many times I feel like I'm offering a life preserver, a life raft for somebody who's gone overboard, right? They're going down, they're going under, they need help. So I'd like to continue with people locally, for individual and couples counseling. I'd like to continue with my groups because I absolutely love that. But I feel my heart being nudged open towards helping people beyond just the community in which I live. So I'm not sure all of what that looks like. I think it will involve seeing some people come in an intensive counseling setting. Eventually, I'd love to be able to do more speaking on this to help educate other therapists, other people that are helpers, to help equip them, pastors, missionaries, anyone in a helping profession, doctors, nurses, right? Because many times women need to go in and see a physician. And being able to equip the helpers, the caregivers, with, hey, what do I do? What do I not do? So I'm really open. I'm glad to see that there's more websites and resources and online groups and books that are out there. Lord willing, I'd love to be a part of that and contribute in that way.
So Jules, as you look forward, what do you want to do? Where are you going to go with all of this training and experience?
Well, Michael, I am really passionate about helping women recover from betrayal trauma, coming alongside couples. And then I'm also really passionate about caring for and helping caregivers who have people come across their path with betrayal trauma.
And you're looking at doing that both with individual folks on a local basis in kind of a weekly format, what we might call traditional counseling, but also looking into diving more deeply into intensive counseling.
Yes. I like to focus locally because it's where I live, right? It's giving back to my community. But I'm also aware that I feel like I have a gift that shouldn't be hidden, that the need is beyond Denver, Colorado. The need is great. It is across the United States. It's across the world. And so I really want to be a part of this growing movement of bringing awareness to the impact of sexual addiction and infidelity on a marriage and on a partner. And what does it mean to come alongside betrayal trauma and support not just the individuals and the couples locally and globally, but also what does it mean to support caregivers, counselors, therapists, pastors who have people coming into them saying, help, this is what's going on. So one of the things I'd like to do is maybe a series for helpers saying, what do you say, what not to say?
Yeah, so that's a great point to close on. But first, I want to say thank you for bringing your expertise and your heart, and for, after 3 years, finally coming into the studio to get some conversation on tape. And what I'm most excited about is that this is more of just kind of a general conversation, but that we are in the process of putting together 4 to 6 episodes in a series around walking with women who have been sexually betrayed and experiencing betrayal trauma. And you're going to be contributing to that, and I just think that's going to be an amazing resource. But definitely to do one for caregivers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, it's been an honor to be here today. I hope some of what we have shared and talked about is helpful to our listeners. Thank you for your patience in listening. Know our thoughts and our hearts go out to you in whatever situation you find yourself. And if we can be of help along your journey, please reach out to us at Restoring the Soul.
Julianne, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'll see you at home.
So thank you for listening to another episode of Restoring the Soul. We want you to know that Restoring the Soul is so much more than a podcast. What we're all about is helping couples and individuals get unstuck. You know how some people go to counseling or marriage therapy for months or even years and never really get anywhere? Our intensive programs help clients get unstuck in as little as 2 weeks. To learn more, visit restoringthesoul.com. That's restoringthesoul.com.